Hey gang, Invincible Season 4 just wrapped, and it's safe to say that it was probably the most unique season of the show up to this point. A hell of a lot of risks were taken, a lot more action was included, and we got a boatload of new characters while some established ones took a backseat. We have progressed so far past what this show once was, and while it does appear like it's going to slow down a bit for the next season, we can never truly go back to normal after the amount of space trauma that happened in Season 4. My thoughts on all this ended up being a little mixed. I actually enjoyed almost everything I was watching, but I do think Season 4 is missing a lot of qualities that make the show feel whole, and as a result, I just wasn't having as much fun as I did with some of the other seasons. We'll get into that in a bit. I also want to say, as a foreword, I'm going to try to avoid talking about the animation for this season. Not much has changed, and it's been oversaid to hell and back that this show looks pretty wonky. I might bring it up in a couple offhand comments, but I am extremely tired of saying the same things about each season. Anyways, I don't give a shit about Viltrum, let's begin. Probably the best place to start would be with the Earth stuff, given that there's not much of it, and it's also at the very beginning. I can say with full honesty that I found myself missing Earth quite a bit during this season. Not that I really wanted to see the grand missions of Brit and Shapesmith versus Doc Seismic, but this lack of B-plot contributed big time to the emptiness that I felt later in the season. It's very much the Viltrum show, which means that the grounded moments with regular people are pretty much completely non-existent. Ultimately, I think that this is the writers' fault, though, because they've written themselves into a corner with Earth. All of the interesting or developed characters have been dropped for the most garbage-fire Guardians of the Globe roster possible, and there's no time to give anyone a complete arc. Even Eve, despite having a solidly interesting narrative, was barely in the season. I actually think they handled the precarious pregnancy arc quite well, yet it was still backseating so much that most of the emotion is just referenced in the final episode. Space really could be made, though. At this point, we should be leaving behind a character like Rick. You're telling me we don't have time for an Immortal or Shrinking Ray cameo, but we're gonna get a fucking Rick scene where he says the most AI-generated lines known to man? The team just seems to be on autopilot whenever we get to Earthside characters, when there is potential for good sub-stories that are either abandoned or underdeveloped. On the complete other side of the spectrum, the Grayson family, at the core of the show, is in top form for this whole season. Mark is in the darkest place we've seen him in the show. He decides in the previous season that he's going to start eliminating threats for good, and he does that with both the Flaxons and Conquest. But this, and the following fight with Thrag, lead to him becoming an extremely angry and traumatized version of himself. He speaks less, and he moves slower. Steven Yeun is practically animalistic at points during this season. He's becoming actually scary. As always, a massive highlight of the season is Debbie and Sandra Oh behind the character. Her scene with Nolan is arguably the best acted scene of the entire season, and she was barely even in this one. She's able to be completely vulnerable and tormented without seeming weak or helpless. Even though she clearly needs the help, Debbie has been cursed with a complex to seem autonomous to herself after Nolan disregarded her humanity in Season 1. She will never allow herself to be his pet. I've heard Debbie in the comics forgives Nolan a lot quicker, which is truly wild. This icy yet bravely confrontational approach seems a lot more in line with her character. I would say this is the best Oliver season on top of that. He's still a bit of a joke, but his training with Nolan takes center stage in episode 6, and his own grievances with his father feeling second to Mark and never really his real child had me fully invested enough to overlook Mark barely even being in that episode. But really, there's one man that this season was all about, and it was Nolan. After 2 disappointing seasons from Nolan, where he only had a couple of major appearances, this time my man got the fullest character development of any character since Mark in Season 1. Between Seasons 3 and 4, I binge-watched BoJack Horseman, and though I don't love to draw comparisons out of fear that I might be the only one seeing them, this season felt very BoJack-like for Nolan's character. Attempting to reform and apologize, only to find that some actions are too unforgivable to move on from. I was worried Nolan would fall into the final step of the BoJack cycle, when he superspeeds around Debbie to block her from leaving in the finale, possibly reigniting the worst version of himself when he lashes out wondering why people don't forgive him. Instead, however, Nolan takes all of the repercussions head-on. It's clear that he's close to his breaking point. His love is really being tested. But the more that it is tested, the more that he understands that the horror of his actions can't be weighed on any scale, and that he deserves to be shunned. But as he is broken down, his love shines even brighter. Again, like BoJack, the audience is played with. When we see Nolan alone, we know how much he wants to make things better, and so we root for him. Then we are confronted by a victim, and are reminded of how low he truly was. I hope this progression between him, Debbie, Mark, and Oliver continues to move slowly. I don't want a sudden shift into him and Debbie in a loving relationship in Season 5. Really, that should never happen. An acknowledgement of his betterness can be earned by Nolan, but some things can never be reclaimed. So with Nolan in his redemption arc, a new lead villain is needed. Conquest serves as this in Episode 5, and we get an unbelievably sick fight between him and Mark that really shows off how much Mark has grown, both in strength and resilience. It's probably the grossest fight of the series, and I think that's a good thing. Given that Conquest actually dies during this fight, it kind of had to live up to the Season 3 fight, which it kinda did and kinda didn't. It was great and all, but a shorter and less complex brawl, bringing the character to an end after the previous, more diverse and lengthy one did not, is slightly disappointing. Nonetheless, I was blown away by a lot of what went on here. But with Conquest dead in the ground, it's time for a new man to enter the fray. Finally, after all this teasing, Thrag is here. And my man is freakish. At first, it wasn't anything crazy. People were throwing fraud allegations and making fun of Lee Pace's voice acting. All of that changed, though, with Episode 7. Thrag really seems unstoppable here. Mark and Nolan, who have dealt massive damage to other strong Viltrumites, can't even draw blood from Thrag. When Mark punches him, there's an impact frame that makes him look like a fucking demon. He literally airbends on Nolan. This guy is not normal. As a character, I would say Thrag is still not that much different from most Viltrumites. Blah blah blah, we're the most powerful race, yap yap yap, honor to our people. The best of Thrag shines with his sort of vengeance quest that is motivated by the death of the original Viltrum leader, Emperor Argol. Thrag clearly really cares about making Argol proud, and that sets him apart from the rest of the crew. Plus, his rivalry with Thetis that leads to the dramatic destruction of Viltrum and Thetis' extremely sudden death was fierce as fuck. You could feel the blood boiling in each of them. With all that covered, let's finish with Episode 8, which is actually my personal favorite. Yeah, not sure people are gonna agree on that, but I'm putting it out there. Despite the lack of action, the finale was just as intense as the rest of the season, and easily the most emotional. Maybe there were one too many of Mark's little visions of people getting murked by Thrag, but those still had some big impact, and it felt very different for the series. Eve's scene where she admits that she had an abortion to Mark had me genuinely a little choked up, so props to Gillian Jacobs for that. And on top of that, the second Nolan and Debbie confrontation leading to Debbie choosing to go off to care for Oliver was the perfect way to leave off on both of them for the season. We end with Thrag finally arriving on Earth, and his plan is revealed. The infiltration of Viltrumites into Earth's society in order to restore their race's numbers. Mark's anger in this scene is so fascinating because you know that he can't deny Thrag's offer. Even if he hates this and wants to fight back, he knows that he needs to at least strategize, and he won't be allowed to meet with anyone else or call back his dad until he gives an answer. A quick flash of Mark's visions of death and destruction play, which was genuinely unnerving with how sudden it was, and then he sadly gives in. And that's where we leave him. This completely unique structure for the finale in comparison to the rest, which usually have a big fight followed by an epilogue, led to not the best finale, but the most consistent and natural one. I was extremely satisfied with this ending, and it's interesting that I don't know if we're getting an immediate continuation of this, or if the Viltrumites really are just going to be in the shadows for the foreseeable future. Those are my biggest notes on Invincible Season 4, but before we close the book on this review, I want to throw out my last few critiques. These are ones that a lot of people have been saying, so I can breeze through them, but I really just felt like they needed to be said to justify my final score. First of all, the animation errors. Like, really, guys? It's not just choppy animation, there's some straight up mistakes in here that are getting past the Megacorp Amazon. This is your biggest show. How do you make Mark look like Paul? That is a complete insult to Paul's power level. And then there's Tech Jacket, whose character is very confusing. I have no issue with the gender switch, but this Disney protagonist-ass personality of hers is so grating sometimes. And lastly, the Hell episode was just sort of miserable. I said in my review of the season's first 3 episodes that Herm would either be amazing or dog shit, and it was definitely closer to the latter. That's gonna leave Invincible Season 4 at like an 8 out of 10? 8.5? I don't know, something like that. It's about as good as Season 3, but I'd put Season 3 over it by a bit. Anyways, here's the episodes ranked, and I'll see you when I see you. I don't really have a next video planned, but something will come up. Bye now.